So that unemployment rate of 4.2%, that still shows a very low rate of unemployment, a little bit below what the Reserve Bank's expecting over the quarter, which will be 4.3%. Look, I am anticipating that the unemployment rate will tick up slowly over the next 12 to 18 months, and mostly because the business liaison surveys that we do suggest that employers are becoming more selective, but there is an offset, and that offset is that net overseas migration is slowing from the rate of increases that we've seen, and that will shrink the labour force, and that will also mean that you don't need as much jobs growth to keep a lid on the unemployment rate.
Yeah, Bessa, let's talk about the jobs figures in July and June. And in June, we saw a surge in that unemployment rate to 4.3%. And then some economists are saying that's down to sample rotation. Now, last month we saw it dropped to 4.2%. So why the volatility? Explain to us.
Yes, look, that sample changes for the reference periods do sometimes pop up from time to time. But I think we can draw a line through the volatility, Samuel, and if we do that, if we just have a look at how many jobs were added in the last 3 months, for instance, that's sitting at a little bit over 20,000. And then if we compare that to the prior 3-month period, that was more than twice that. So we know there are some modest signs of softening in the labour market, but that overall the labour market is still showing a lot of resilience, and that will be very supportive to the economic recovery, which should continue but does still remain sluggish, and something that the Reserve Bank is eyeing very carefully. And of course, earlier this week when the Reserve Bank did publish its fresh forecast, it did downgrade its growth forecast, left the labour market forecast mostly unchanged, but did downgrade those growth forecasts, even though the recovery is expected to continue. And the Reserve Bank is looking at consumer spending very closely, as well as the labour market, when it makes its next decision.
You mentioned there 20,000 jobs growth. That's a trend in the past few months. And we know that immigration has slowed in the country. So is that still keeping up with migration?
We have seen net overseas migration slow. The rate of population growth is still very solid, but just not as solid as what it has been. So that does have implications for the size of the labour force. And what that means then is that if we look over at the participation rate, which just dropped a little bit in this month, is still pretty high. But what it means is if the labour force continues to decrease because of net overseas migration falling, there's not as much people available, at least from overseas migrants, that means you don't need as much jobs growth to keep a lid on the unemployment rate. Having said that, whilst the supply of labour might be seeing downward pressure from those softer net overseas migration numbers, we're also seeing, I think, a bit of a softening in demand for labour, at least in terms of those soft survey signs when you're speaking to recruitment firms that do suggest employers are becoming a lot fussier and selective. I think it's also important to note what's happening with AI. That means that applicants can apply for multiple roles quite easily. And so what we are seeing is a rise in applications per job. And whilst normally that would suggest a softening in the labour market, that has to be eyed very carefully because of the changes coming from AI.